This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are building the future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and Thad Bench is on the show today. Thad is an entrepreneur, educator, and author of Noble Work, a practical guide to profitable, principled business growth. From building a healthcare commercialization company out of a barn on his Maryland farm, to leading it through financial crises, governance challenges, and ultimately a successful 8-figure exit, Thad's stories about what it really takes to grow a business without losing your integrity, your values, or yourself along the way. Thad, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, Joe. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Thad. And I hate to start these conversations with a big question, but I don't think we can go further without this big question, Thad. So bear with me. And that's the idea of integrity. You write about integrity a lot in this book. And so how does that work today in 2026? Because I feel like integrity has bent a little bit. And whether you're talking about politics or in business, and I know CEOs and politicians have lied forever, but I feel like now they're more emboldened to not practice a life of integrity. What do you feel like dropping this book in a world where integrity is not as highly lauded as it once was when maybe we were growing up, Thad?
Well, I'm sadly, I think you're correct in that, and we've got a lot of examples of that on the national stage at the moment. But the fact of the matter is, integrity really is the bedrock for success, and it is something that if you practice good governance, you hold yourself to a high standard and hold your team to a high standard, you're going to get a lot of dividends from that, because people know it's very clear to see organizations that are run with purpose and run to a higher calling. And it just so happens those happen to excel in many instances. And hey, listen, sometimes the bad guys finish first, and that's the way it is. It's been that way throughout history, but far and away, the best chance to meet with success is if you hold yourself to a higher standard.
But sometimes the idea of integrity does butt up against the idea of, and the idiom, it's business, it's not personal. How
Well,
does that go in that regard?
yeah, I think that there's one of the things that we talked about many times over the years at Benchworks was talking about the concept of graciousness and treating each other with a level of respect. And that was true internally and also true externally. And I don't think that ever goes out of fashion. And one of the things that happens when you have that sort of environment is that people are willing to proffer up maybe an idea that's a little bit out there because they know they're not going to get penalized or thought, less of, because they were actually being really creative. And that's where the gems come from. But that also, you have to have an environment that tolerates that. And your idea about, does integrity go by the wayside? It's business, it's not personal. It's like, look, we're all people interacting with each other. And I think there's, not really much of a line in between both of those sort of spaces.
All right. So in your world, because, I often feel like when people write books like this, people will often say something like, well, isn't this common sense? And I think we all know the retort is, well, it's common sense, but not normally common practice. So a lot of things like integrity and stuff are common sense, but they're not exactly like we've kind of started our conversation with. It's not common practice. When did you realize that if you did not practice integrity or something happened because it cost you, it might have cost you something because you were not embracing integrity?
Yeah, well, and again, we're in an age where, run fast and break things seems to be the motto. So I do
Yeah.
feel some pressure on that. But look, the very definition of integrity and governance is doing the right thing when nobody's watching, right? And so I think that the level of trust that an organization that holds itself to a high standard is so high that people realize that, look, if we make special demands on people, or our clients know that we have an organization that, again, has integrity in its foundation, it just buys you a lot of grace. And I found that in the course of time, as we grew, we did not always trip to the light fantastic, as they say. There were some real challenges. We had cash flow problems, all manner of very common things that entrepreneurs face. But we always were able to communicate, and all of our partners knew that we were going to try to do the best thing, the right thing. And even when things conspired against us, things beyond our control, regulatory changes, things that would put a lot of commercial pressure on the organization, we were able to work constructively through those periods because people knew they could trust us. And that's it. At the end of the day, what's the value of money? Money is based on trust, that you give legal tender and that you're going to get some value for that. And trust at the end of the day is one of the highest attributes an organization can ever have.
That's good. In the book, you talk, speaking of those low points, you describe losing a client that represented 50% of your revenue right after you bought your dream farm, which again, not the worst, not the best to be buying a farm. What did
Yes.
that fear feel like when everyone else was sleeping? Because I have a feeling you weren't sleeping much when that happened.
No, no, and I mentioned that in the book that, it was palpable. I had young children. The farm that we had acquired was not in great shape, and so it was gonna require a lot of effort and money to get it to where we needed to be, and then to lose an anchor client like that, that was obviously a kick in the stomach, to be sure. And then I would try to model things out to say, okay, how can I cut expenses? And even cutting expenses to the absolute bone, it was still not enough to turn the trajectory of the business around. So then I realized the only thing that I could do was to sell my way out of it. And this concept of return fire, of outbound sales and marketing activity, I just simply didn't have a choice. But does that make it any easier in the middle of the night to calm your nerves? It doesn't. But I will tell you this, that if you are in a difficult period like that, the best thing that you can do is to stick to your plan, work your plan. And I'm fond of saying you're only one good phone call away from having your fortunes change. But you've got to be proactive and get out there and get in market.
What did you learn from that, and maybe what other entrepreneurs can take away from the fact that, I think all of main businesses have that where they have a singular client that's driving the company, whether it's a large part of their profit margin or what have you. What did you learn from that that you're like, I never want to be in this position again where I'm beholden to one client? Anything, any kind of like wisdom that you learned or can impart to people that may be listening or watching this where they have a
Yeah, no,
similar
no,
situation?
no, I have a very specific thought on that. Concentration of business issues are by their very nature can be existential. And it's hard because if you have a client who really values you as a partner and gives you a ton of business, you're certainly not going to say no, right? And you definitely run with it, but realize that there's a risk associated with that level of business coming from one or just a handful of clients. And you should do everything in your power to diversify, lower your exposure there. And when times are good, there is a tendency to sort of lean back and not push on business development quite as much. That is a mistake. That's the time when you actually should build on that momentum. You've got the free cash flow, you've got the resources to go invest in go to market activity, so you can diversify your customer base. And I would also say, at least in my experience, business is like a leaky bucket, right? You're constantly filling it up with new clients, prospects, and so on. And clients move on, or they age out, or whatever the case might be. So you have to be diligent and always keeping that pipeline going, and never back off on business development. Otherwise, you will find yourself in that concentration of business situation, it's put a lot of businesses out of business.
Excellent. And so we've been talking in periphery about this company, BW Health Group, which you successfully exited a couple of years ago now. First of all, let's go back a little origin story. I mean, this basically started out of a barn, right? That's how the whole company
Yes,
started.
yes, it
How do
was
you
an
how do you take a company from a barn to a very substantial exit?
Yes, well, that is one of the it's a great American story, and literally, we were in a dairy barn. on my farm because it was the lowest cost basis. And when we bought this place, it was a large structure. I'm like, what am I going to do with it? It was very decrepit. And I said, you know what? These aren't milking parlors. These are actually offices. And so we moved everybody into it. Amazingly, everyone came. And we worked out of there for about 5 years. But during the course of that work, we ended up working with Wyeth Pharmaceuticals, and we were a branded product company. It was literally the Chotsky's business way back in the day when if you go into a doctor's office, you would see all manner of things that were branded with a drug name on it. And so we were invited to brand meetings, and that was the line of work that I was in, and I was an active participant in those meetings when we're talking about the competitive set or a competitive product launch or whatever the case might be. And I was a student of business, and so I would just raise my hand and make an observation. And finally, I got a phone call from a brand manager saying, "Hey, Thad, can you, when you come to New York for the next partners meeting, could we have a beer?" And I'm like, "Sure. I think I like you, and I like beer, so no negatives. Let's get together." And what ended up happening is that, look, we pay our advertising agency a very significant retainer, and fully 10% of the ideas that we're executing against are coming from you and your team. Would you be willing to do some direct mail and some other things for us outside of your, um, you know, current line of business? And we would save money and it would diversify your business. And I was like, absolutely. And that's how we started to transition out into more strategic work. And then over the course of 20 some odd years, we built that brick by brick. Ultimately, the branded product stuff went completely away. There's a statute that eliminated that product line because they thought it drove too much cost into healthcare. It kind of did, actually. I understand the rationale, but by that point we had diversified out and taking on more and more strategic assignments, and then we were able to hire the best people and building up that roster to when we actually sold the business, we were well known as one of the leading commercialization firms for small to mid-sized pharma in North America. And it was a very exciting thing, but it was done incrementally over the course of time by surrounding yourself with giants, is what I call it, getting the very best people that you can bring into your organization.
Wow, amazing. Great story. And so what's it like to work in this healthcare sphere, which is very, I don't want to say that has a negative connotation, but like whenever those two words combined, healthcare, are uttered, it's never a good thing. It's politicized, it's demonized. What's it actually like working within it? Because we all see the
Yeah.
outside, we see the clickbait and the headlines, but like, what's it like working in it?
Yeah, no, and to be fair, a lot of that reputation is well deserved, right? Because you take a look at the profit margins that the pharmaceutical companies enjoy, and they are large. But what we don't see, and is well known, is that the number of clinical trials that fail, the vast majority of those fail, and so there's a huge sunk investment that has to be made up for when a product actually does run through the regulatory hurdles and actually can go to market. So they deserve those profits to a degree. The
Yeah.
other piece is when you talk about the patients, and one of the things that was the most inspiring thing for us was hearing the patient stories. And we worked in a lot of rare disease, some very serious disease states. And when you would hear testimonials from patients who took a medicine that saved their lives or improved the quality of their lives, that was very gratifying. But I would also just say this, to me, that what motivated me the most, and people, when you're in the pharmaceutical industry, it's like a mantra. You have to say, oh, it's all about the patient. And it certainly is. That's a big part of it. But for me, what really got me excited was when I could see a younger colleague buy a house or make a decision to start a family. Then I knew that we were really cooking with gas and that people felt comfortable enough to make big decisions in their lives because they had the financial capacity and security to take that step. And that really was one of the best things about owning a business, was seeing that security and that opportunity being passed on to people that really deserve it.
That's great. And speaking, anecdotally, obviously, is there self-awareness in the industry that, you know, like you mentioned, like there are some bad apples that get a lot of that give the entire industry a bad rap. But is there like awareness within the industry of like, hey, listen, we have to go above and beyond to prove that we're doing this, like you said, for the patients as opposed to doing it for the bottom line. Does that exist there, or is it just like any other business where like you're too busy to think about that kind of stuff?
No, I mean, look, I would say that the creative commercial pressures are intense, like all businesses. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you're in the aerospace business or the consumer packaged goods or the pharmaceutical, you got to make your numbers, right? So there's a lot of focus on making your numbers. To just to be clear, on balance with that, though, a lot of very good humanitarian work does get done. There are patient assistive programs to be able to help patients who can't afford their medication to so that can be funded. There are global initiatives, all manner of things that the industry has done to try to pay it forward. And it is, it's funny. We worked with Pfizer, one of the huge corporations, and you think about Pfizer because of its scale. That people are going to be walking around in Darth Vader outfits, because this is like this huge, sort of corporation. And in fact, it's just full of really motivated, decent people who just happen to work for one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and their motivations were very pure, and they wanted to do the right thing. So I think that stereotype really is misplaced, and I'm very proud of the work that we did to help bring medicine to market and ultimately help people.
Awesome. And someone who reads your book and finds out more about you, that they can, it's obvious to me, and I think for most people, you're concerned for legacy. Like you are not one of these people that wants to leave the planet Earth with $0 in your pocket. Someone told me this joke, which I love, is like, I want I want my check to the funeral home to bounce. I want to have no money left. And in a way, you're living that life not only just financially and what you do philanthropically, but like just the legacy you plan on leaving behind. Why is that so important to you, Thad?
Well, I think uh, I think everyone to a certain extent, how are your children going to remember you? How, but I would also say that 2 or 3 generations from now, those memories will have long been faded, but ultimately to yourself, to your own self, be true. And I think that that's something that's really important. It's just the pride that you can take of knowing that you've run an organization that had a good moral compass, that you treated people well, and you sleep well at night. And the whole idea behind this book, and in the sort of the why of like write this book, and I always say that when someone says to me, "Hey, I've written a book," I call it an eye roll moment of like, well, what is it that you have that's so important to tell that someone should spend 8 hours reading your book? And what this book is all about is the great advice that people were kind enough to pass on to me early in my career, and also some of the things I learned on my own, and also some of the very significant mistakes I made along the way. So by aggregating that advice, the things that I discovered that worked, and the mistakes that I made into one book, a person that has the courage to hang out their shingle and start a business, I think will really benefit from that because they don't have to wait 30 years to get it. And it is, a lot of it is common sense, but some of it isn't, like the specific financial ratios you need to hit and what happens in the real world. How do you talk to the bank when you've blown a covenant? All these things are pressures that businesses face. And my goal for the book is to have it have coffee stains on it because it stays on someone's desk and they can refer to it as they make their way forward in building their business.
Ah, it's good stuff. And speaking of business, there's a great line in the book you call "Business can be a crucible." It's a really good line. And what part of yourself did entrepreneurship expose that you didn't know existed before you were an entrepreneur? Because I think a lot of people have like an entrepreneurial mindset, but they don't realize what entrepreneurship does to your, I guess, your DNA or your atoms and your molecules that exposes something that you didn't know was there. What was it in entrepreneurship that you learned about yourself that you didn't know until you took that leap?
Yeah, I think it's the mental toughness that you develop in the course of time and the tenacity to keep going. And I I think I mentioned in the book that I like all things maritime, and the idea of the best bilge pump, which pumps water out of a boat. The best bilge pump in the world is a scared man with a bucket. And so there are sometimes when you're faced with a business challenge where you're just downright scared, and you don't have a choice but to execute. Or you could fold your tent. You could be in a state of sort of rigor mortis because you're just so upset. You can't do that. And I call it a lean forward attitude versus a lean back. You have to lean forward, tackle that challenge, and just keep moving. And I think that you look to the ancient Greeks and some of their and the Stoics and their wisdom about fortitude and having courage, and to sort of to take on those challenges. I think that's something that over the course of time I realized I had the capacity to do. And obviously I'm not unique in that. There are millions of people that do that find their inner strength faced with that challenge, but it is not something that comes easily.
You mentioned the Stoics, and obviously the Stoic vibe is you can control what you can control. Everything else is just noise. But then things like 2008 happen. How does a Stoic uh, learn or handle something like a 2008 financial crunch where it's really a lot of it you cannot control. A lot of it in
Yes.
what a phrase I hate is it is what it is, but in this case, it is what it is. Like you can't do anything when there's a financial downturn. What did you learn from those times that again having that stoic mentality of controlling what you control? How did that jibe at the moment?
Well, and I go into that era in some detail in the book because I had to own the responsibility that I didn't really understand the financial arrangements that I had with my bank to the level that I needed and needed to. And so I get this phone call from our banker right in the midst of the financial crisis, where all of a sudden they said, "Hey, you are in violation of your loan covenants." And I didn't understand what the terms were for the loan covenants, and basically how much receivables you have and how much they would loan against that, and whip and all other manner of metrics. And to be fair, the bank had never asked about those before either, until everything started to implode in the financial industry. Then all of a sudden, everybody dusted off of their old protocols and looked at those covenants. So it is incumbent on a entrepreneur to understand in detail what their financing arrangements are. And I had a advisory board member who once said to me, torture the numbers until they talk, right? And so knowing your numbers backward and forward, and also what your financial arrangements are, and what your responsibilities are, is going to keep you out of harm's way. But that particular time was, I call it the flying monkeys. It's like, what is happening? And it was very, very scary. And I think, we look back at in history now, but we came very close to having a real depression. But for the grace of God go I, right? We managed to pull out of it, but it was a very scary time.
What do most entrepreneurs romanticize that they completely misunderstand? Like you talk about the good times. I mean, obviously, people are going to know, hey, this guy exited a company he built from the ground up, and that's awesome. So that's the romantic happy ending of the movie. But
Sure.
what do you think part of entrepreneurship? Maybe it's something you learned that most people would completely understand until they're actually in it.
Yeah, well, there are things that happen along the way, from the very mundane of you don't feel well, you've got a lingering cold or a little bit of the flu, but you've got to get up, and it's the November and it's freezing rain, and drive 3 hours to a prospective client to get a maybe, right? To say, just to say, you have to pitch, and there's nothing you want to do more than just pull the blanket up over your head and stay in bed, but you've got to get up and do it day in, day out. And early on, when an entrepreneur launches a business, there's all this excitement, and you hang out your shingle, and you're going to market, and then the grind begins, and maybe you do well, but then you've got your first setback. And how do you respond to that, of keeping yourself motivated and fresh? And then also, there's treachery. There are people that do bad things, and you have to be able to handle that, and also not let that completely jade your view of the human condition, that most people are good and there are some bad people out there. And if they do something that is quote unquote treacherous, I've seen some things like that that was not very nice, but you just have got to soldier on and not let that cloud your belief that most people are good and can be trusted.
That's good. And one of the things, entrepreneurs that I'll never relate to is the idea of delegation, because as you know, when you're a founder, you're probably doing a lot of things, but eventually you need to start delegating. I am a terrible delegator. It's really hard for me to trust other people. Was that hard, easier for you, this idea of like ceding responsibility as the company is growing? Because I think for many entrepreneurs, they love that because there's certain things they just don't want to
Sure.
do anymore. But a lot of times it's just the idea of losing control can be very difficult. How did you deal with the idea of delegating duties and letting the other people that you have around you do the things they're supposed to do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that's one of the most important things that you can do for the health of your business is to push authority out. That's when you're creating shareholder value. And if you're a privately held company, I was the shareholder, right? We had a couple of other small investors. But to create value, you need to build an organization that if you decide to retire or heaven forbid you get hit by a beer truck or something, the organization will continue on. Then you've got something that you can monetize. If you're the only person that is driving the revenue or understands the secret sauce that is surrounding your product, then it's something that you can make a good living, but you're not going to create value. The other piece is that because our business got so technical, cell and gene therapy, I had to hire scientists that really understood, the science behind this. I didn't have a choice. I did not have the skill set. So I had to bring in people that would help us frame out strategy to be able to support these very high science companies. And again, the idea of surrounding yourself with giants, or even on the commercial side, Tom McDonald, who was the president of Benchworks for years, Melissa Johnston, my COO, Brenda Fujanic, who ran talent. These people were superb at what they did and better than me in certain functions that they did. And that requires confidence. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen people do it where they will bring in staff that the founder is quote unquote smarter than, and if you bring people in that have incredible skills, all that does is make you and your organization look good. But you've got to have the confidence to say, all right, these people are really, really top tier. And isn't it great that they work with me? And so I think that that's a trap that people can fall into. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, you again, going back to this idea of creating shareholder value, when you build something that can kind of run on its own, then you've really accomplished something.
That's good. It reminds me of the business cliche, which drives me crazy. I guess if you do business media enough, bad, you hear them all over and over again. But never be the smartest person in the room, I think, is the most ridiculous phrase out there. Because if you're
Yeah.
not smart enough to ask the right questions, you probably shouldn't be in the room. You know what I mean? Because this idea of like
Sure.
being a dummy and having smart people, it's so silly. Because sure, not that you should be not the smartest person in the room, but like you should be able to ask the smart people questions, because if you're not informed of what's going on, you're just going to look like an idiot. So this idea of being not the smartest person is so silly to me. I don't know if you have a thought of that, but I think like
Well,
the
yeah,
idea,
I
yeah,
I always say that if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. You need to find these people and ask questions, and I think that's something that's hugely important. And the other piece is particularly for those that are earlier in their career, is to not fake their way through things. And I remember I used to be in the building materials business many years ago, and I swear for the first year, 50% of my presentation was, I don't know, but I'll find out. And I would always find out. And then I would get back to that potential client with the answer that they were looking for that I didn't have at my fingertips. So people respect that.
that's
They
great.
also know when you fake it. And if you're faking it, you're going to get caught and you're going to lose credibility, and it's just not worth it. So there's no shame in saying that you don't know, but you'll find out and then do that.
That's great. And so lastly, that if a founder's listening or watching right now, they're exhausted, overwhelmed, maybe having those late nights at 2 a.m. where they're not sleeping, what would you tell them after everything you've been through, that you've been through literally, whether it's a downturn, whether it's losing clients, What did you learn that you can impart to folks right now if they're going through? Obviously, read the book as a good start, but where else should they look to when it comes to taking the next steps?
Yeah, what one is you're only one good phone call away from having everything turned around. So, just have hope that things can get better. Two, practicing some self-care. It's like get the rest that you need. And for 15 years, I would take a 15-minute nap in the middle of the afternoon. People just knew, and I would just shut my door for 15 minutes, rest from about generally from 2 to 2:15, wake up, have a cup of coffee, and I was good to go to 7 o'clock, just to be able to keep your energy level up, exercise, eat correctly, all the things of taking care of yourself as a mammal is really, really important. Because if you burn and you just go and go and go, and you're going 100-hour weeks, eventually you're just going to fall apart. So I call it slowing down to go faster, that you have to realize that you're in the long game and that you need to take care of yourself along the way.
Excellent. He is Thad L. Bench Sr. The book, Noble Work, A Practical Guide to Profitable Principled Business Growth. Thad, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Joe, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Thad and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.